episode this week. This is Leah Lindeman, author of the Canadian Reminiscence series, and in that series we have Redeemed from the Ashes, Ghost of My Heart, Wisps of Gold, and Scathed Bones, my newest release. This week is a little different. I did an interview with Davyd Gosselin, the author of Murder at Matins. We both decided that we were going to do a book swap and give each other reviews on our books. So the following interview is just us discussing our books, our writing processes. I hope you glean some neat information about the writing life in general, and definitely check out Davyd's books. Look at the kittens. She wanted to join me. So definitely check out his book, Murder at Matins. That's the one I read, but the first one in the series is The Boathouse Murders. That follows Professor Bevan Jones solving a murder mystery. Very Agatha Christie-like, so if that's what you like, then you'll like his book. Take a look. So yeah, thanks for coming on today, and let's chat about our books. Okay. So my first question for you is, now I do realize that you wrote a little bit of this on the back cover of your book, but how did you come to the idea that you wanted to write? How did you become an author? Did you always want to be an author?
Well, I always liked books, and my mother was a librarian. But I remember being 7 years old, climbing the bookshelf in the house and examining all the books. So I was always fascinated by words in books. And the writing, I guess it was teacher in grade 7 or level 1.
Okay.
She really liked my writing, and it's amazing the power of a teacher, right?
Yeah, the right teacher, a good teacher.
So she took my writing and said, we're going to put it in the yearbook. So they published a short piece, descriptive piece called The Truck Driver.
Okay.
So that kind of praise started me off.
Yeah, I kind of started with writing a similar roots to you. I started off reading Nancy Drew specifically, loved mysteries, a little bit of the Hardy Boys, and then I got sucked into the Chronicles of Narnia at grade 3, and then The Hobbit. I still haven't tackled Lord of the Rings because it just seems very daunting, but I will because I love the movies and I love the story. And then, yeah, same thing here with writing. I had my kind of first foray into writing. We had these little short story contests in school. And so I remember entering in grade 4, and I wasn't chosen to read it out and be like one of the participants in the actual contest. But everybody had to submit a story. And grade 4, I wasn't chosen. But grade 5, or was it grade 6, I was chosen. I didn't end up winning. But that was kind of my first taste of, okay, this is something fun to do, to share some bit of yourself through writing with other people.
Yeah, a lot of stuff I did as I reached teenage years was a lot of poetry, but I saved that for myself.
Okay.
Yeah. Did you start writing stories from the beginning, or did you dabble in things like poetry or?
So short stories was in school, right? And then I switched from the public school system to homeschooling for high school. And I'd say probably starting grade 9, grade 10, we started doing a lot of like classical literature. So the English grades, Victorian era type of stuff. And, you know, that's where you come across Alfred Lord Tennyson, Lord Byron, William Wordsworth, and yeah, that poetry really captivated me.
I like Wordsworth.
Yeah,
I came to the classics later.
Okay.
It was mostly mysteries up to like 18.
Yeah.
And then when I got to CJEP, I got in more into the classical stuff.
Okay. So yeah, we were heavy into the classical stuff. I'd say, yeah, specifically grade 10 and grade 11. And I just became very inspired by the writing, and I loved the prose. And that's when I started writing when I was 15, 16. And it was just a very it was a very simple day. I was lying down on my trampoline outside and I was just watching the clouds. And then that's when it just started pouring out of me. All these words started coming together and I started writing a poem, and I was just doing it all in my head. And then I went back inside and I wrote it down right away. And then every day, or at least every 2 days, I'd go for a walk outside, and just nature would be such a huge inspiration to me. So I would come up with a poem as I was on my walk, and then I'd come back home and I'd scribble furiously, making sure I remembered every single word that I came up with, and I had a poem. So at the time I was doing piano, but I quickly soon realized that I was not gifted at it. I'm happy I learned it, but when I found my passion for poetry specifically, I was like, you know what? I want to put money towards something that I know I love. And my parents started reading my poetry as well, and they thought I had a gift, and they said, we want to support this gift. And that's how I got into the Institute for Children's Literature, which is a correspondence course in Connecticut. And then that's kind of like my official journey into becoming a writer and an author. Yeah.
I was encouraged in CJAP I took creative writing in CJAP, and I took journalism in CJAP.
Okay.
So I got a taste of those styles of writing or genres. And one of my teachers, Jan Draper, she suggested I take the creative writing program at Concordia. So she saw some promise, and that's where I furthered it. So I did the creative writing program at Concordia, but they lost my portfolio.
No.
They lost my portfolio, so I couldn't get in. So I moved to Montreal, and I couldn't even take creative writing. I was there in the winter too. I started in the winter semester.
Oh my.
So it was so funny. So I had to wait till the following year to take creative writing.
Oh.
But I never had to submit a portfolio because my teacher knew the head of the department.
How did you go from taking a course in creative writing to I think the series you have is the Bevan Jones series, right? I believe that's all the works you have so far. How did you start your first novel? Like, what was the inspiration for that and for the Bevan Jones character?
I don't really know.
Right?
I beg your pardon?
His name, I'm saying it correctly, Bevan Jones?
Yeah, Bevan that would be a classic Welsh name, right? Bevan.
Oh, okay.
Bronwyn is another classic Welsh name. They have a lot of Y's in their first name. Yeah. And Jones is a Welsh name. Okay. It's because I corresponded with the name Bevan comes from correspondence with a woman I knew who was a writer who was Welsh. So that's where the name came from. The idea was with me because I always loved boathouses ever since I was a kid. I adored boathouses. There's something mysterious about being in a structure and there's a boat bobbing in the water. I don't know. It fascinated me from a young age. So I knew I wanted to do something about a boathouse. Detective, well, because I like detective stories, I always adored Sherlock Holmes.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but it took a while. I mean, I wrote at work. I was in IT for a while as a technical writer.
Okay.
And I would write a little bit after work. But the process of writing the first draft of the Boathouse Murders took 10 years.
Wow.
I was working mostly full time.
I can understand that because it took me 6 years to do my first book, Redeemed from the Ashes. Yeah, and I think that is normal, especially if it's your first draft and you're really getting to know the craft of writing and you're making mistakes and you're learning from other people.
Lots of mistakes.
It takes time.
You think you have the greatest stuff in the world, and sometimes you do. And then you think, I wrote that, like I thought that was amazing. I had to learn to eventually kind of, no, that's It takes a while to learn to write. Well, at least to tell a story well. It's a real gift, I think.
Yeah. What
I
are
always
some
admire people that tell oral stories, even if they're simple
storytellers?
ones. Some people have a gift, right?
Yeah.
They went to the grocery store and then they have this whole story they tell you, and they're just so good at it.
It's true. And what are some of the best lessons you learned in those 10 years? Because you said, well, you said one of them was you thought you had the greatest thing in the world, and maybe you do, but you have a lot of lessons to learn about it. So what are some of those lessons that you learned?
Well, a lot. I mean, I think reading about how other writers write and um, not depending on inspiration.
Yes, that's a big one.
You know, your imagination is important, and that you get your ideas. Or at least I get my ideas, and I guess in my case, I would say I'm inspired. Um, I feel close to God when I write, but as far as lessons show up, it's work. It's funny, eh? But it's just work. You just show up and you do your time. I found instead of I went by pages, not amount of time. So it's a commitment, and it's not romantic. But I learned you have to show up and you have to work, do the work.
Yeah.
Those are two important things. It doesn't just magically happen. So I guess that'd be three things. And it's not just inspiration; it's work and discipline. It wasn't pretty, you know, because I had these romantic notions of you know, inspiration striking and it just flowing like honey, you know. But some days it does, some days it doesn't.
Oh, there you go. You get those beautiful moments, as you said, where you have those scenes, right, that you've been imagining in your head for so long, and then you finally get to write them, and it does feel like magic. But then, well, at least for me, then I'm like, okay, I've got the scene, I've written it. I am not much of a plotter beforehand. Like, I know my beginning, and I know my middle, and I know my end, and then I know certain various scenes that follow that timeline. But I do kind of, I'm a little bit of a pantser in that I like to kind of be caught unawares sometimes by my characters and how they want the story to go and how the story needs to go. So for those scenes where I've written it out and I'm so happy with it, and then I come to the next thing and I'm like, you know what? I don't know what's happening. And it's really scary and intimidating. And you're just looking at the blank screen and you're like, I don't feel inspiration. I don't know what's happening next. But I find if you just start writing, even if it's total garbage, it takes you somewhere. And then you
It does, and that's I tell people, well, part of the excitement of writing is I learn what's going to happen next.
Exactly. So
And
are you
that's kind of nice. That's nice. It's good to hear someone else that has that experience too.
so you do the same thing. So you're a little bit more of a pantser than a plotter.
Yeah, and then I get into the characters, and the characters start to, you know, speak. And the story develops from there. They kind of speak to me. I know it sounds funny. No, I'm not going to get weird on you, but I just they tell me what needs to be told. So there's a certain amount of parking your ego and not trying to control everything that's going to happen in the story. And that's hard. I find I've had to learn that too. I mean, obviously you have a certain control, but you can't control. Anyways, I know it's a contradiction. You control, but you don't control.
I totally get it, because in Wisps of Gold, when I was writing, I think I was still writing chapter 1, and the antagonist, I actually had this whole conversation in my head with the character because I had a certain direction that I wanted him to go in. But then it was like the character was speaking to me and he's like, no, I need to be in this field, or I need to have this vocation, and this is why, and this is why. And I was like, no. And I was arguing in my head for 20 minutes straight. I probably seemed like a lunatic. If anybody could, you know, take a little listen into my mental sphere, but turned out for the best. Like, I loved the way the story turned out. So I do get it. It does sound a little freaky, but it happens.
You're talking about Wisps of Gold?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's your latest, right?
Well, the latest one is the sequel to Wisps of Gold, which is Scathed Bones. And that
That's
happens,
what's alluded to at the end, right?
yes, yeah. So that happens a year and a half to 2 years later. And it's funny because I got the inspiration for the story of Wisps of Gold because I knew what the sequel story was going to be, which is very odd. But I was doing research on the the Caribou Gold Rush, and I came across the legend of Agnes McVie, which I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but she's this legendary serial killer in BC.
Okay.
In the early 1870s, and she would lure minors into her 108 Mile Hotel. So in the sequel, well, she doesn't have the hotel yet, but that's the hotel that my protagonist owns in Wisps of Gold. But she eventually owns it, and she brings these minors in, and her and her husband kill them for their gold. And she also supposedly ran a human trafficking situation where she would take these girls and sell them off to minors. And there's supposed to be like $100,000 to $150,000 worth of gold that is in that area that still hasn't been found. They have found $8,000 worth of gold so far. But yeah, and there's a whole legend story. And so I came across that and I was very, very interested, but I knew that it wasn't going to be, like, I needed a main story for my protagonist who went against the serial killer. And that's where Wisps of Gold comes in. And then I kind of came up with the idea for that so it could lead into the sequel of Agnes McVie. So that's how that all started.
That's very interesting. Must be a little darker, right, than the first book?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, but I know there's a dark elements to Wisps of Gold, you know.
Yeah.
You really get a sense of her being in danger most of the time. Rose, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but, I liked her character. Is that a little bit of what's the word? Not typecasting, but is that a bit of you in Rose, or is she someone opposite to you?
Yeah, she has a little bit of me, but she has a lot of opposite of me too. I used to be a person who had a lot of walls up and wouldn't let myself be vulnerable. So I kind of took that part of myself that was me maybe like 5-10 years ago, and I just took it to the extreme. And that's how her character is. And she's feisty, I'm feisty, so that's definitely still a current theme in my life. But in terms of her having walls and kind of holding on to things that don't mean much, yeah, that was just an extreme of where I was 5-10 years ago.
Because she's definitely a very riveting character, you know.
Yeah, I wanted a character that wasn't super likable, but you have an empathy journey with that character throughout the novel. Because I think there's a fine line between crafting characters that are not likable, period, and you never like them, and then characters that you don't like, but you learn to understand or empathize with as the novel carries on. And that's what I'm hoping I did with that character, so.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the older I get, though, I realize, you know, really, there's all those things that annoy you about people.
For sure.
You know, so I used to think I'll seek out those people that are always perfect, but they don't exist, you know. So. Anyway, she just seemed real, is my point. She just seemed real. I think that was good.
Yeah, and that's what I was really going for. A character who is definitely, I like to have flaws in my characters. And hopefully through the story and through the characters they interact with, their flaws are not made perfect, but their flaws, I guess light is shed upon the flaws and they can overcome and have some victory in their flaws. And I think it's a great picture of humanity and what compassion and understanding can do on flaws and people who are flawed. How do you view writing in relation to being a Christian, especially when your work is not super Christian or preachy? I don't know. I'm sure you've read Christian fiction where you have the story, but then it seems a little preachy. I know I've read a bunch of Christian fiction where it kind of is inserted, but it doesn't really seem to flow with the story. It's almost as if it's inserted just because the author's a Christian and therefore they need to insert some sort of Christian moral. But your book doesn't really have that, but you do show a commune of faith and where people struggle with daily temptation. So it's a very realistic picture.
For me, it's multi-pronged. I struggled with that at the beginning, and I've had many people say, well, you know, even recently, you know, murder mystery, how's that Christian, you know? And I don't feel the need to answer. I never wanted to be a Christian author. I'm more interested in the lost, right? But I do like to write about I don't know how to put it. I just know when I write, it opens a window to God, and when I write, that connection is stronger. So I don't know how you would describe how I approach it. The book about the boathouse murders was, again, it's about truth versus falsehood. It's about the human condition. The murder at Matin, it's a faith community, but I just wanted to share how complicated people's lives are, how complicated people are, and to, you know, expose maybe some of the falsehood, but also to get through to the reality of maybe people who call themselves Christian. You know, it's like, it's not a simple thing, right? It's
Yeah.
But someone said to me once, they said, you know, when a Christian bricklayer builds a house, he doesn't use Christian bricks, you know. So that made me realize, hey, it's okay. It'll come out. You know, Christian, it'll come out in my writing. I don't have to explain it, you know, or defend it. So, but you're right. I mean, it's not something that's obvious in my books. But if you read them, if you get the different layers, I think you'll see, you know, certain characters like the priest, the ex-Vietnam vet. You can see the man is struggling as a human being, right? And looks to God for hope. There's Caitlin, who's trying to hold on to the faith she had as a young woman, because she's facing, it's not the way she wants it to be. So, and then you have people like Bob, who just seem to be so like, oh, you know, annoying,
Arrogant.
but down deep, you know, he cares, you know. So.
Yeah, no, I have I actually have a very similar view of my writing as well. In that I want to write about things that are real. I think a lot of Christians, just in general, we tend to stay away from certain subjects because they're uncomfortable. You know, everybody deals with real temptations, like you show in your book very well. and different situations that despite our faith, we still have to struggle through things. And so I think even in my own writing, that's kind of what I try to aim to show.
I see that in Rose. I mean, that what I realize. She's on a similar track. You know, she's struggling, and I like to show that as well. That
Yeah,
we don't have to be perfect. We just have to, you know the difference between right and wrong. It doesn't mean we'll get it perfect all the time, though.
hmm yeah, exactly. So that's a neat. It's neat to find another Christian author who shares that same view of
Oh,
writing.
it's rare. Yeah, correct.
But yeah, I think just showing a realistic view, and that way any reader can read your work and understand and empathize with the character and see those struggles and can relate to them too. And I think that's the best way to reach readers is just being realistic and yeah, giving them the chance to really understand the characters and grow with the characters and not just be preached at by the characters.
Yeah, I definitely wanted to avoid that. If people want that, they can go to church. A visible church. So I'm more about the invisible church, the true body of believers. So that kind of I got that idea through Martin Luther.
Mm.
So that's my approach, and even this commune, they're all there. They all say they're Christian, but the true Christians, we see who those are. Right?
So let's stray a little bit from that. I'm curious, how do you
Yeah,
keep straight your murder mystery? Because you have a lot of different tangents going on in this book, and then at the end you bring them together and you make sense of them. How did you keep track of all that?
well, I started with a storyboard at first, but I find, like I mentioned earlier, that that's the way my brain works. So my brain always has ideas and thoughts. So if I have one idea, it comes up with another one, and then another one, and another one. So I think I just create the setting and the characters, and then at a certain point, okay, it's going to be about that.
Hmm.
And then it's just a question of aligning. That's where my logical brain comes in, where I get a delight, a pleasure out of making the connections, dropping in the clues. And I guess there's a little bit of a tease going on with the reader. I drop clues, a little bit of red herrings as well, and that's fun for me. It's a game a little bit. I try not to offend the reader, though. I don't want to lie to them, but I figure I like that in a book, so I do that for my readers. I read a book that I'd like to read, basically, you know.
Yeah.
But keeping it all together, it's not easy, and that's where you have to the second, third, fourth, fifth draft, right?
Yeah.
You have to go through and make sure you're connecting everything. But I like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, as I said in my review that I wrote, it seemed a lot like an
Hmm.
Agatha Christie style where you have so many
Yeah,
different characters and she drops red herrings, right? And then you come to the end and you're like, "Oh, wow, is this person the whole time for
yeah.
a reason that's completely like almost it wasn't even very obvious in the story at all." So yeah, I did really enjoy that aspect of it. I really felt because, as I said, I was into Nancy Drew when I was younger, but definitely in my teens, I got
Oh,
into.
you did that too with Priscilla in Wisps of Gold. Like it's like, oh no, I didn't see that.
Well, that's what I was aiming to do. And then I have a friend. He's another author friend, and he read both Wisps of Gold and the sequel. And he said, you seem to really like psychopathic women. I was like, yeah, well, for this little for this story, yes, it worked. But my next story is going to be very different. It's not a murder mystery at all. So it's going to be,
Well, it was a nice Wisp of Gold, the treasure hunt, and then that whole, almost a conspiracy there.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
that was very well done.
Well, thank you very much. So you've written The Boathouse Murders, which was your first book. and then
Yes.
Murder at Matins. Is there a third book coming in the series, or does he have a new?
I also wrote a collection of short stories. It's called Little Red Dress and Short Shorts.
Okay.
It's not very big though. It's like 100 pages, just a collection of short stories. And then there's a book of poetry online. His original goal was to do 4 in the series. So in my head, I have a Murder by Method, which happens at a little university town,
Ooh, okay.
and then in an acting department, in a theater department, because I did some theater and acting. And then the 4th one was going to be murder something. It's going to be in Maine on the ocean, because I used to vacation in Maine,
Okay.
in Old Orchard Beach, Maine, if you know where that is.
I don't.
Yeah. So Murder by Degrees. It was a murder in a wax museum at a resort. So that was
Wow.
number 4.
Well, those sound very interesting. So
Yeah.
are they,
See, I already had the idea of what I'm going to do.
so have you actually started on the third one, or are you in the process of writing it?
I started the 3rd one, Murder by Method, but I'm restless. I I I can't have the same food every day. I have to change my spices constantly. So the same with my writing. Um, I see the book going a certain direction. Oh, it's like the other 2. Do I want to do that again? Do I want to have a big surprise ending where everything is exposed? So I stopped. And then a friend of mine challenged me, said, Dave, genre fiction, why don't you do something that's going to really be hard for you? Why don't you write a book that really is meaningful and impactful and it's going to cost you something? That's what he suggested. So I paused.
Okay. And this book that's going to cost you something, is this like, is it in the works, or you're just, or is it in the works in your mind?
It's in the works in my mind because most of my books come to me when I have a first sentence. And once I have that first sentence and first paragraph, I know what the rest of the book's about.
Okay.
And I've tried that on paper. And the other day I had something that's closer to what I want to say. And I can't remember now what it was. I should have wrote it down, but that's getting closer. I don't know, is that how you work, or does everything just from reading? Because it sounds like your next book, your sequel to Wisp of Gold came from something you read rather than something that came to you on the street.
Well, all the stories. So my first one was set during the Halifax explosion of 1917.
Oh, wow.
All the stories
Excellent.
that I've written are inspired by the historical events that I read about or come across. So that first one, the Halifax explosion of 1917, this was back when I was 14, and we were on a camping trip, and my dad we were around the campfire sharing, and my dad said that he had read an article about the Halifax explosion. He started explaining it to all of us. And I was just so gripped by the story. And I was like, wow, I can't believe I've never heard of this before. How come there are no books on it, or like a movie that was done? And so I really started looking into it. And the more I looked into it, then this whole idea of, now all my books are part of a series. I call it the Canadian Reminiscence series, because each standalone novel is based in a certain province of Canada during a certain historical time period. So that's why none of the books are connected, or the standalone novels, I should say, because all the standalone novels are getting their sequel novellas. But so I heard about that, and I was in the middle of my writer's course with the Institute for Children's Literature, and I don't know. The story just kind of started forming in my mind. And the last assignment that we had to do was to either write a nonfiction article or to write the first 3 chapters of a novel. And I already had the idea. So I was like, I'm going to go for this. So I went for it. And when you're part of the course, you have an editor that's given to you. So I sent it off to her
Mhm.
and she had a few comments, but she said, "This is promising. You should finish it." And so that's a novel that took 6 years to write. And in that time, I finished the course. I got married, had my
Mhm.
first 3 kids. So I was just juggling a lot of, being married, being a first time mom, and then, getting into this writing world. And so, yeah, that was the first book. And that explosion story, what really caught me was just the large number of people that died and the large number of people that were injured. So there were 2,000 people that died, 9,000 people were injured, and then you had so many more that went missing because right after the explosion, there was this big, huge snowstorm that happened. And so rescue efforts were hampered by the snowstorm. And yeah, so just that idea really formed the story for that. And then for the Caribou Gold Rush, I didn't even know about the Caribou Gold Rush either. I think I don't even know where I came across it, but I did somehow. And then came across Agnes McPhee. And then the story for Wisps of Gold came about. And then the same thing for this. This was all I think it was a year or two ago. I read a book about personal stories from World War II. And there was this small little section. So they have different sections like stories on the home front, stories on the war front, stories about accidental deaths, and all people's personal stories. And there was this very small section in the book where it was stories from the Canole pipeline. And it's this pipeline of oil, crude oil, that they were shipping from the Northwest Territories to the Yukon to Alaska, because after Pearl Harbor, the American Army was worried that the Japanese would attack from the west, right, from the Pacific Ocean. And so they made this agreement with the Canadian government to ship some of their forces and build this pipeline. So it's a piece of history that I had never heard about, that most people I know don't know about. And so I always want to come across from an angle that's different. And so that story just kind of shaped the story I'm writing today. So
That's I like the whole idea. Canadian Reminiscence
yeah,
series. That's what
Reminiscence
you
series.
call it. I think
Yeah,
that's captivating when I saw that on the front cover.
yeah,
So it makes it more. I don't know. I like Canadiana, so it picked my interest maybe more. You know.
yeah. And I want to build a legacy, I guess, with my writing, and I love my country so much. I should be like an American, but I'm Canadian because I'm so patriotic. And you tend to think patriotic people are Americans, but I love Canada so much, but I don't know much about its history at all, because when I did high school, homeschooling for high school, I used an American curriculum. So I know all about world history and American history, but Canadian history is like almost nothing. So it's actually fun for me to write these books because I'm finding out about my country's history and these individual provinces' history through the writing. So it's a very fun experience.
Yeah, I was just telling someone to. Yeah, I was just telling someone tonight that I love to learn history through narrative.
Yeah. And I think that's it, where there's so many people today who are like, oh, history is boring. And it's probably because they didn't have a good history teacher in high school or elementary to really bring them the love of history. And the teacher that I had was an amazing teacher and really captivated the spirit. So it wasn't just dates and people, but there's a whole story behind, the timeline and the history that you're learning. So that's kind of what my aim is also just to educate young people and say, we have this amazing history, but through, as you said, a narrative, something that's going to captivate them other than just the facts.
Yeah, you're actually saying verbatim what I said to my student.
Yeah.
This morning, I have a student. I teach English second language too.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, and I was teaching online for before COVID even.
Okay.
And I got but also I'm a translator, French to English. So lately, I've been translating on a big project, a 6-month project. But
Wow.
I kept this one student. I had 10 students online before this project, translation project. But I kept one. He's a major in the Canadian Army.
Oh, wow.
And he's going to be deployed to Ukraine in a month. And he's been deployed elsewhere. So I've been helping him improve his English because at the level of major, he has to speak with a lot of the NATO personnel and many Americans. So, but we were talking. He's a philosophy teacher, actually.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. I think that's a lot of the questions that I have for you. I really enjoyed talking to you, Davyd. This was really neat. And it seems like
it's sort of like should have done it sooner. I love to hear about what other people are doing, other writers are doing, how they approach their writing. Because I don't know about you, but me, sometimes you get in this little writerly bubble and you forget there's other people out there doing really interesting stuff.
Yeah, and recently actually, and this whole idea came from I did this same thing, this like book review swap with another author that I actually met over a podcast radio show called Writer to Writer Interview. And he was a horror author. His name is Robert P. Otone. And so we had to interview each other, which was, I said I was open to any author of any genre. And then I got a horror author. So I was like, okay, this is, I don't read horror usually. I haven't even read Stephen King, although I would like to. But anyways, it was very interesting. And then he said, well, why don't we do book swap? I'll read your book, you read mine. And we did the same thing and had a great chat. And it was just interesting that even though he writes in a completely different genre than I do, you still learn from each other about the craft of writing, love of writing, books. And then from meeting him, I've met other people who just really bring about a nice sense of writing community. And then we're both part of the Christian Writers in Quebec community. So yeah, when you're actually doing the writing, it's kind of nice because you're in that bubble by yourself, right? And you're sharing very intimate parts of yourself through the story. But then you come to realize that, yeah, it's healthy and it's good, and you can learn to share with a community of writers or book reviewers or just people who love books in general. So
yeah, it's really fascinating. I mean, I learned so much about myself and learned so much about God when I write. So that's my pleasure.
yeah.
I think someone said, I think it was Sherwood Anderson said once, the reward of writing is the writing itself. And it's like,
Yes.
I mean, everyone wants to be famous and make money, and I have nothing against making money. But oftentimes it's sort of like anything beyond the reward of the writing itself is bonus,
Exactly. Yeah. And it's true. I'm not even me, although I would love to be a Canadian household name. And I am trying to build up that legacy through, showcasing each province. At the end of the day, it's, well, this is before COVID, but the connections I made with readers at book signings, or just connecting with people over love of words is just very rewarding. And then, as you said, when you're actually sitting down and writing and learning from your writing, it's the best feeling in the world. That's the magic of writing, I find.
No, I agree. I totally agree.
Yeah. If you like this video, please hit the like button, and if you would like to get the weekly episodes of Pen to Paper, go ahead and subscribe down below. Every week is something new on the writing process, the writer's life, publishing, anything to do with writing, even author interviews as we did this week.